Welcome to the 62nd annual conference of the Independent Distributors Association. My name is Christian Höferle. I'll be your Monday morning speaker. And since this is Corona times and COVID-19 times, I'm coming to you virtually as the whole conference is virtually virtual for all of you. My topic today is multicultural communication. Communicating efficiently across cultures in light of Corona, in light of a globalized economy that is affected by the pandemic, and by the new mediums we are beginning or have begun using to communicate, much more virtual, of course, compared to the face-to-face communication that we used to have. Why am I here today for you? I have had the pleasure and the privilege of working with multinational organizations for much of my professional career. I am a cultural coach and a trainer, a facilitator. I am German by passport. I'm American by choice, and I am Bavarian at heart, which means to say that I am from a part of Germany that is called Bavaria, and that is very much informing my cultural background, the way I behave, the way I show up in the world. And I will tell you a little bit more about my background as we go along here today. I simply want you to understand that culture is at the heart of what we do, is at the heart of what I do. And it has mainly to do with the fact that I come from a culture and I come from a country with a very specific history, a history that most of you might be aware is not necessarily rooted in good stewardship of relationships, is not necessarily rooted in understanding those who are different from us. And that has led my grandparents and great-grandparents' generation into the abyss, into the disaster of the biggest humanitarian crime on record. My mission, my purpose in the work that we do is not to correct history. My purpose is in educating our clients, educating people on cultural differences, overcoming them, finding ways to communicate efficiently in light of cultural differences, so we can work better together, so we can work at our peak and in peace with each other. Because those who are different from us, they have a beautiful thing. They have a different worldview. They have a different way of looking at things. However, recognizing how to harness this and how to align it with our purpose, with the way we communicate, that is not often easy. It comes with practice. It comes with a mutual understanding. And this is what I'm going to share with you today. I'm going to give you a few tips and pointers as to how you can improve your communication across cultures. And since we have an hour together, I figured maybe we don't just do this by you looking at me, talking at a camera and recording it so you can watch me. I have prepared a few visuals for you that I would suspect give us a little bit more meat on the bone. So there's a background that is popping up for you as we speak. And now you see me and the background. Isn't that marvelous? Technology in the virtual world. So I'm going to make myself a little bit less important. I'm going to put myself down here in the corner so you can actually see what's going on around me and beside me. Beside me here, the logo that you will see on these few slides, that's the logo of our company, the Culture Mastery. So we help clients master this thing called culture. And when I say we're going to look at 12 success strategies, these are fairly random or fairly arbitrary. There's more than 12 success strategies for global business and for efficient communication across culture, especially during times of COVID. However, I picked this dozen for you because I think these are the good dozen that you want to start with. So let's imagine a scenario similar to this. At work, you sit next to someone whom you went to college with, and one cubicle over, you find a coworker who spent their youth traveling around the globe. And the global nature of the world economy is a fact that no one can ignore anymore. So you have people that you know well, and you have people that come from a completely different background than you, and they may not sit in the cubicle next to you. They may sit at the home office, one Zoom call, one Microsoft Teams call away from you. However, you're collaborating, you're working with people who are like you and some people that are not like you, whether these are your colleagues or your customers or your suppliers. Doesn't really matter. You're still going to communicate with them, aren't you? And let's face it, gone are the days of working only with people that you grew up with or people that are similar to your worldview and are similar to how you view the world. And even though COVID and Corona has affected international business, even though it has affected how we look at a global economy, we are still interconnected. Our work, your work, still deals with clients, customers, suppliers from outside of your native country and your native culture. And smart business decisions depend on your ability to bridge these cultural differences and these understanding these nuances. Now, you know now, or you are now in a position of leading or of inspiring or of communicating and managing because you've learned how to do this in your home culture, in your native culture. You are good at doing this, managing, leading, inspiring, communicating with people who are like you or similar to you. However, on a global scale, you also need to be just as efficient with coworkers, clients, customers, and vendors who are sometimes quite different from you. So what made you successful with quote unquote your people could easily derail you when you're working in a diverse context. So how are you going to master yourself in this unfamiliar environment or sometimes unknown, uncomfortable environment? Clean and efficient communication is a key prerequisite for any business to succeed at any context. But the ability to inspire, lead, motivate, manage at a global level is what sets true global leaders apart. No matter whether you're expanding your business into foreign markets, whether you're trying to recruit the best candidates from a diverse talent pool, whether you're leading a multinational team of people, or most likely now a remote and virtual team of people, or whether you're ensuring your marketing and your branding messages are received in the intended way around the world, cultural competence, cultural intelligence, and having a global mindset is a key business skill. Sometimes it's referred to as a soft skill, to which I take a little bit offense because it's not soft if it's business relevant. It's not soft if it's bottom line relevant. It's actually quite a hard power skill. So what do I mean when I say global mindset? Global mindset is your ability to work and relate effectively in light of these differences, in light of divergent behavioral norms, whether you find them normal or not. And when you see me say the word normal, you will see my hands go up and I do air quotes, because normal is only a arbitrary definition of what behaviors should be when we look at it in a global context. So companies who have this global mindset, or rather companies whose employees, whose team members operate with a global mindset, those companies are proving to be more successful. We have the data to prove that. We've seen this in multiple studies over years. Companies with a global mindset do better business. And since most people are often more moved to action by a fear of loss rather than by the prospect of some gain, let me look at it from the inverse. Let me flip that coin a little bit. Organizations who don't have globally minded employees are at risk of losing business and missing their targets. Let me say that again. Companies without globally minded team members are at risk of losing money at the table of the global economy, COVID notwithstanding. And in our interconnected world with our global economy, everyone is now competing on an international level. You are, I am, all of us are, because there's somebody across the world, across the globe, on the other side of this planet who offers a similar service or similar product or similar widget as we do, and they might do it better. They might do it for less. They might do it faster. So we're competing at an international level, whether we set out to do so, whether we defined ourselves as such or not. Well, maybe you're not competing on an international level if you fail to develop those cross-cultural skills. Up to you. Companies and individuals who fall behind on building cultural competency, they're not just leaving a little bit of money behind, they're leaving a lot of chips on the table. And today we're going to discuss how you can avoid that from happening to you. Because being cultural savvy or culture savvy is no longer an optional, but it's more a critical factor for international business success. And once you decide that you want to stay ahead of your global competition, you will look for strategic partners who can assist you in expanding your cultural agility. And more importantly, your what we call your ICE-Q. ICE-Q stands for IQ plus CQ plus EQ. Well, what does that mean? You heard IQ before, your intelligence quotient, your subject matter expertise, your factual knowledge in your industry vertical or in your specification. You need that. You also need CQ, cultural intelligence. And you need EQ, emotional intelligence. Knowing a lot about other cultures, the mere knowledge, that's fine and dandy, without having the human capacity, the social skills, the emotional intelligence to relate efficiently to those who are different from you. These are individual skill sets that in and by themselves will not grant you success. Therefore, we created this term ICE-Q as the combination, as the sum total of IQ, CQ, and EQ. So if you want to, quote unquote, get it right in a global context, the first skill you want to practice is communicating across cultures. That's what we're here today for, right? Communicating in a multicultural environment, despite COVID, despite Corona, despite all the restrictions that we've experienced in the past few months. Talking, listening, conversing, negotiating, socializing, corresponding, messaging. The way these activities are done in your home culture are very likely not done the same way, in the same manner abroad, or in the same way with representatives from different cultural backgrounds with whom you're interacting. Whether your communication takes place in a real life setting or in the virtual space, culture will always be a major factor to consider. It influences everything we do, the way we talk, the way we listen, the way we act or react, the way we feel, and the way we see the world. So when people from different cultures aren't aligned, miscommunication and mismanagement easily can turn into costly results, whether it be in business or in personal relationships. So when dealing with another culture, most of us feel like fish out of water at first. Well, welcome to the conundrum of global business leaders. It's no different for me. When I first left my native culture of Germany, I sure felt like a fish out of water when I first came to the United States. You may have heard the old joke when two young fish swim through the ocean, minding their business, and along comes this old grumpy fish, big old wrinkly grumpy fish, and passes these two youngsters and says, "Hey boys, how's the water?" And he keeps on swimming. The two fish stare at each other, keep going, keep swimming. That goes on for minutes, and then one young fish turns to the other one and says, "What the hell is water?" We are not aware of the environment in which we grew up. We are often not aware of the water that nurtured us and in which we learned how to swim. We only notice it when we leave our native cultural waters. That's where this expression comes from, to feel like a fish out of water at first during your intercultural activities. Only if you leave your pond, your waters, your river, your ocean, and swim somewhere else will you recognize that the water is in fact different. So I would suspect that many of you work in diverse environments. Some of you, maybe even outside of your native culture, you might be on a foreign assignment. And I'm sure you notice that being efficient when working in your intercultural, cross-cultural context, it doesn't always go smoothly. There are challenges. And smart businesses, smart leaders will offer their employees some coaching and training. Maybe their whole teams will come together to recognize the cultures that are represented in their work environment. And that goes far beyond the often quoted do's and don'ts of global business. Business etiquette, yes, that's nice to know. You can look that up. There's apps for that. You can have a phone for that. It tells you do or do not. Yet the question remains, do you always really understand the underlying principles of human behavior? The why people behave the way they do. And that is something that takes a little longer to develop, this understanding of human behavior, the underlying reasons, the whys. That's what I said earlier. That's what you need ICE-Q for. Most successful organizations and business leaders fully comprehend the value of preparing and continuously developing their employees for the various behavioral standards in the intercultural workplace. After all, the success of any global business depends on how well team members are able to navigate these nuances and differences. And it also depends on how well and how swiftly leaders develop a deeper understanding of their own culture and those cultures they interact with. In my experience, this isn't only the most effective way to work at one's peak and in peace with each other, as I said earlier, it is the only way that respects and harnesses human differences. So it's not about creating diverse work environments where we have people of different skin colors and ethnicities and ages and genders and religious and political backgrounds. It is about bringing those we work with into alignment that is more inclusive and equitable than just the mere diversity. So as I said, for many years, this has been my passion. Being a German fish out of the Bavarian waters and now living in the United States. I've lived in the United States for more than 17 years now. And a lot of my work has been with multinational organizations, from the automotive industry to chemical engineering to fast moving consumer goods. It runs the gamut. And a lot of our clients work in an environment similar to yours, where we talk about manufacturing, about customization, about heavy duty materials that meet a demand that is global and does not necessarily reflect regional specifications, or that does not always need does not respond to consumer needs. Your products are long-lived, long shelf life products that make a difference for a lot of people around the world, whether they know your product or not. And we've dealt with a lot of industries like that are basically a B2B industry serving the greater human good behind the scenes. Now, you mentioned me doing these, or you remember me doing these air quotes when I said normal. Normal is a term that I learned to become skeptical of when I caught myself that I encountered a new behavior that was different from the way that my mom and dad and my family around me behaved. And my gut reflex was, this is not normal. Until I recognize, well, it may not be normal. However, the people who are acting differently, who do something in a way that I wouldn't do it, they're still getting results. So this normal thing, I may have to revisit that. And I learned that all of these different sets of normals that exist around the world, hundreds and thousands of different normals, they all have their validity. And as we build bridges between corporate and national cultures, as we establish long-term relationships with clients and business partners, we expand our horizons as global leaders, and we expand our acceptance of different normals. So when you master the transition between these different normals and between cultures, you will be much more successful in global business. So let's dive right in. 12 strategies. The first one that I would like to bring you awareness to, and I'll move myself out of the picture so you can see the other beautiful picture here, is self-awareness. Know thyself. Recognize your own communicative preferences. Before you can learn anything about others, you need to learn how to adjust the way you get your message across with people from other cultures. An important first step is for you to find out how you communicate at home, how you communicate with people who are like you. It is critical that you know what the baseline is to define from which behavioral set of normal you're adjusting. Maybe you have already done this part of your work, perhaps with a coach or a trainer. Maybe you've also taken a personality assessment or a cultural profiling assessment. Find out what is your preferred way of communicating. Trust me, if you haven't done this yet, if you haven't taken a personality communication test, if you haven't taken a cultural assessment, chances are you may not be fully aware what parameters affect the way you communicate. You might find it normal for yourself. Can you define it for others? Know thyself, establish the baseline of what is your communication. Then you can come to the next step of adjusting to another person's behavior, another communication profile. Number 2, respect other people's view of the world, other people's model of the world, as we often say. Different cultural regions have different ways of expressing their thoughts and feelings. They process information based on their system of values, based on their philosophies, their norms and traditions. What you consider to be normal may almost certainly not be normal for others. Be prepared that in a global context, your worldview may not be shared by the people with whom you communicate. And here's a bonus tip. Familiarize yourself with many different philosophical, that's a big word for a German speaker. Familiarize yourself with as many different philosophical approaches. There's a German philosopher, a polymath, and an explorer that some of you may have heard of before. His name was Alexander von Humboldt. And he said the most dangerous worldview is the worldview of those who have not viewed the world. Let that sink in. So respect other people's model of the world. Yours is not the only one. Mine is not the only one. There are multiple ways of looking at the same thing. And after you've established your communicative baseline and you've reminded yourself that other people's view of the world are just as relevant and valid as yours, that their normal has the same right to exist as yours, you're way on your path to becoming more culturally competent. Now, some of these behaviors you will recognize and you will say, okay, mine is this and I consider mine to be normal. This is this other person's behavior, or in this case, that person's behavior. And I'm not really sure how I can handle this, how I can deal with this otherness. No matter how unfamiliar or uncomfortable or unknown the behaviors are that you experience when you interact with foreign cultures, remind yourself that people act with a favorable outcome scenario in mind. We say, presume or consider positive intent. Instead of rejecting what you deem as not normal conduct or not normal behavior, ask yourself, what might be the positive intention at the root of this very behavior that is so unfamiliar or uncomfortable or unknown to me? And again, a good culture coach will help you unpack certain situations. If you have a mentor in your organization who has developed some experience and background with this specific different culture, check in with them, learn from the knowledge that is within your organization already. And if it's not within your means, if it's not within your organization, go look for it outside. I'd be happy to assist. So presume positive intent. May sound a little bit controversial to some because you might argue, well, this person did something morally questionable, and how can I make this mean that it's positive? Well, if it's morally questionable to you, that does not necessarily mean that it's morally questionable to them. Again, remember number 2, the bonus tip, philosophical approaches. There might be different value systems at play here. Not every culture bases their behavior on the same value systems that you have. Now, how do we begin to learn and understand these different normals? What can we do to come to deeper understanding? You may have heard that we have 2 eyes and 2 ears, but only 1 mouth. That is a great biological indicator that observing more and listening more before we talk would be a great start. I would go as far as saying you're not only listening to respond, you may want to consider listening to relate to the other person. Be quick to observe and slow to judge is one of those phrases you may have heard before. Communication across cultures requires that we listen with our whole bodies. Truly listen. Not only the words themselves, listen to the tonality, listen to the tone, listen to the pitch of the speaker, to the volume at which they communicate with you. Observe their body language and facial features. Get a feeling for the mood of the environment. Pay attention to what is not being said. Some cultures will make it a point to leave out certain aspects. They may not think it's necessary to communicate in that way. They will leave out certain things. Pay attention to what's not being said. The result of this type of relational listening is rapport. Rapport is being in sync with somebody. Rapport means you create similar wavelength of energy, so to say, or emotional frequency. The more developed your EQ, your emotional intelligence is, the more effortlessly you will build that rapport. So listening not to respond, not listening to think about, oh, what's the next thing I could throw at this person? What's the next thing I need to say here? No, listening to relate to that person, to get a deeper feeling, a deeper understanding, a deeper idea of the value system and the set of normal the other person comes from. Now, this may be easy for me to say. This takes a lot of practice. This doesn't happen overnight. So forgive yourself if this doesn't work right away. If you are communicating with people from another culture and there is not this immediate rapport, you fail to build that. It isn't failure. It is feedback to you. You're receiving information from this type of communication that something hasn't worked yet. I come from a culture where we are not raised like this. I come from a culture where there is this desire to perform and to be quote unquote perfect, because we need to, in German culture, it's important for us to, in business especially, to appear competent and be, well, perfect, not make mistakes. So I didn't grow up learning to deal with these setbacks in a more constructive way. This is something that I've been practicing my whole adult life to adjust my normal to a little bit. So not always will there be rapport with somebody from another culture right away. Be okay with that. Be okay with the fact that you will make the occasional mistake. You will step on people's toes. It's inevitable. What's important is how you recover from these cross-cultural faux pas, from these missteps. That's what matters. Every gaffe can be instructive. Every miscommunication is an indicator that you haven't built enough rapport yet. Keep on building. Again, it's not failure. You didn't do anything wrong. You simply learned what worked and what didn't work. Keep going. Nobody was born a multicultural communication master. This is something we all need to practice. And without practice, we won't get there. There is a phrase in my native language, which is German, as you probably can tell by now. Kein Meister ist je vom Himmel gefallen. No master has ever fallen from the heavens. There is no such thing as a right out of the gate plug and play master in anything. You have to practice. Practice makes better. Practice doesn't make perfect. Practice helps us striving towards excellence. And as you do this, as you build rapport, as you listen to relate, as you are aware of yourself, as you recognize other people's model of the world, make sure to once in a while check in with yourself, see, are you on the right track? Pace yourself. Whether English or any other common language, for that matter, doesn't matter which language you are using with your foreign counterparts, whether English is your native tongue or a foreign language, in my case, slow the heck down. Enunciate every word, every syllable if necessary. Your vis-a-vis, your counterpart may not speak and understand the language in which you're doing business at the same level as you do. And while we're at it, avoid jargon and slang. Idiomatic language is culture specific and often will lead to confusion. Let me give you an example of what I'm still struggling with this sometimes. When I first came to the United States in business, there was so much jargon and sports talk that didn't make any sense to me at all. So if you're from North America, you may have heard terms like step up to the plate or hit it out of the ballpark or score from downtown or this doesn't move the chains or there's the he performed over par, under par. She had the bases loaded, or all of these are phrases that come from spectator sports or active sports that are very popular in US culture or in North America in general. Now, let's face it, baseball is maybe America's pastime. It certainly is not the rest of the world's pastime. Sure, there are a few other countries in which baseball is quite popular: Cuba, Venezuela, Japan. And I guess that's about it. Maybe there's a few more, and forgive me if I didn't name them all. However, these phrases that come from these sports do not translate with other cultures who are not familiar with this. Likewise, if you are dealing with somebody from India, South Africa, Australia, and they use cricket talk, how much cricket do you know? Would they use cricket if they're culturally savvy? Would they use cricket phrases in business? chances are they won't. So not only pace yourself, check in with yourself, how fast you're going, what type of language you're using, how you use your native language in business. Make sure you avoid those slang words or these jargon words that are very common within your native culture and yet do not really work outside of your culture and may lead to misunderstanding, or worse yet, your counterpart may simply nod their head at you and think, oh yeah, yeah, and they will smile because they will not let on that they have a difficulty understanding what you're saying, because it would mean that they are losing face, that they're not appearing competent enough in front of you, and you will never know that they didn't understand. It will, this is the quicksand of business misunderstandings. Make sure you pace yourself, avoid jargon. Also, check in with yourself. This would be basically the next step in this journey. George Bernard Shaw, the famous Irish author and playwright, he's often quoted with this phrase, the problem with communication is the illusion that it actually happened. So do you really know whether what you sent out was received? You want to make sure that your message has landed. An effective way to do this is by checking in with your counterparts. You can ask questions like, which of these ideas do you like best? Or which of these concepts that I just highlighted for you resonated most with you? Another way is to paraphrase what you heard your counterpart tell you and throw it back at the person with whom you communicate. Paraphrase it, put it in your words, say, hey, I've heard you say this, or what I heard you say was, and then you repeat it back to them. And when they agree with you, when you recognize, okay, we have mutual understanding, great. This is how you find out whether your message has landed and whether George Bernard Shaw can move on to a different quote. Now, in international and intercultural communication, the way we express our ideas and our thoughts and our opinions often is highlighted by the level of directness that we use in our language. So I'm saying here, scan for directness. It has hurt me more than once. I come from a culture where we communicate very directly. Some cultures are like this, the Germans, the Dutch, people from the Netherlands, also people from Russia and Israel are known to be very direct communicators, also known as low context communicators. And others prefer a very indirect, a very high context style. Examples would be South Korea, Japan, Thailand, Indonesia. Direct talkers phrase messages in a very explicit way, maybe the way I am doing right now, often spelling out every detail, leaving no stone unturned, or making sure that I express myself in a way that is unambiguous, because ambiguity would be difficult for me. I want to make sure that there is no more question marks lingering in the air. I want to make sure that you have all the details and all the facts. So that is my communication style. Remember, tip number 1, know thyself. I now know that my communication style is much more direct than many other cultures. Indirect communicators, on the other hand, they imply parts of their message without even verbalizing them. They leave space to read between the lines. And it takes an experienced listener to pick up what is being omitted. It also takes doing your homework. So cultural intelligence doesn't appear overnight. Working with a trainer, working with a cultural mentor will deepen this learning process. It takes a while to figure out how direct was this, how indirect was that, how can I adjust my communication style to that level of directness or indirectness. My wife and I, after we moved to the US, we didn't really often make friends in the way we gave very direct feedback. And it hurt our business relationships. It hurt our staff retention. We lost employees because our feedback style was very direct and was not beating about the bush. And our employees in the Southern United States, not all of them were able to handle it. They felt that we were being short with them, that we were being bad bosses, if you will. And it took us months to figure out what was wrong, and that it was, in fact, our behavior that caused this and not the employees that had at that point long left the company. So it's not just the business with clients and vendors, it's also the business within your organization that is affected by your communication styles if you are in a multicultural, multinational work environment. So how do you find out about all these differences? What can you do to avoid the missteps or make less missteps than you did before? One of my favorite phrases is, he or she who asks the highest quality questions controls the communication, controls the environment. Not all questions are of the same quality when we communicate across cultures. I want to encourage you to use open-ended questions, the type which do not prompt a yes or no answer. Ask one thing at a time. What did you like about the presentation? Would be a question that I could ask you at the end of this. And avoid negative questions like, don't you have a comment? Or didn't you like it? That would be a negative question. That could confuse a listener whose first language is not the same as yours or who come from a different communicative background. Remember, the person with the highest quality question facilitates the most efficient conversation. You may have read somewhere that being inquisitive isn't always the best approach with some cultures, and I would agree. Being too nosy, being too curious is a double-edged sword. That's why it's really paramount that your questions are, in fact, of the highest quality, which includes your mindset. When your questions come from a place of truly genuine curiosity, then your questions will be received best. So let me say this in a different way, because I get these questions often. My clients ask us, well, what would be a taboo question to ask culture XYZ? And sure, there are some things that may be off limits, and that really depends on which cultural background we're dealing with. But overall, my mantra, my credo has been, no question in and by itself is offensive. No question in and by itself is off limits if, that's the big if you can ask the question with genuine curiosity and without judgment. Sometimes the way you ask a question, the tonality, the words that you use can come across as judgmental, can come across as even condescending. Like, so you expect me to do it just like this? That will be a question that is loaded by its tonality and by its phrasing as a question that is with judgment. However, if you phrase your questions without judgment and with genuine curiosity, even if you break a taboo, even if it was a touchy question, your curiosity will carry you through that. Your counterpart will recognize, okay, she or he is not from my native culture, and it appears and it sounds like they truly want to know what's going on. So keep that in mind. The mindset in which you ask these high quality questions will help you build rapport and avoid missteps. Also in communication, be careful how much fun you think you're creating. I think I'm bloody hilarious. Ask my daughters, they will tell you that sometimes you are. Not always, though. So mind the laughing matters is what I say here, because humor might be universal. The way we tell jokes is not. And what's funny in your culture or in your company may rub people the wrong way abroad or across the Zoom call. And that can be a real tripwire in cross-cultural communication. What makes a scenario or a storyline funny in one part of the world can cause a misunderstanding at best or a falling out at worst in another culture. Unless you have a solid grasp of the behavioral norms of this culture you're trying to be funny with, I would advise you to err on the cautious side. If in doubt, keep the jokes in the pocket, be unamusing if need be. If you feel that you have to include humor in your communication in order to accomplish your goals, give your counterparts some context. Explain to them why and how your joke is funny in your culture, and know that there is still a chance you'll look like a fool in front of them if they don't think so. So you can explain the joke, and usually, I mean, how many times have you explained a joke and that really deflated the fun of it totally? So err on the cautious side. And you should be culturally and linguistically savvy enough to know what makes your foreign audience laugh. You should know enough, you should have enough IQ to know what they find humorous and which context they view humor as appropriate. And if you, in fact, do that, if you have that understanding, if you have that cultural and linguistic knowledge, then by all means, feel free to use humor as it is appropriate in that context. However, cautious, all right? I talked about this before, talked about body language as part of the relational listening. Now, body language, that can also be a big tripwire, because too often we are told, or we have learned, or somebody has instructed us that body language is a dead giveaway for how people feel or think, regardless of what they say. Now, I'm here to bust that myth. That is, especially across cultures, that is not the case. As humans, we create and send messages not only through the words we use. In fact, the word base only accounts for the smallest part of our communication. If you're familiar with the Moravian model, Albert Moravian, the word base of our communication is less than 10%. So our tone of voice, the way we modulate our voice, and our body language, they make up the biggest part, the most meaning-making part of our communication. So if you want to transmit information across cultures, you want to be mindful of all three of these components: your word base, your tonality, and your body language. And body language varies significantly across cultures. What is considered rude or foolish in one country may be welcomed as warm and friendly in another one. What people from one part of the world would perceive as arrogant, individuals from the other side of the globe may see as healthy confidence. When dealing with people from diverse cultural backgrounds, both sides should be aware that perceived insults are often completely unintentional. To find out what certain nonverbal cues actually mean, you need to become a master at asking quality questions. Remember the tip I had earlier. These questions can either be directed at the people you interact with or at yourself and your cognitive and intuitive skills of reading behavior. So ask yourself during intercultural interactions, what's going on? What could they possibly mean? A quality question could be posed and should be posed without implicit judgment and curiosity, as I said earlier. And let me give you an example. Let's say you're sharing an idea with another person, and they have their arms crossed the entire time, and like this. So you have a choice what you want to make that mean. You can make that mean closed offness, or you could make that mean boredom or disinterest. You can make that mean anything you want. However, that's your mind read on that other person's behavior. So a poor quality question in that scenario would be, why are they so closed off? Or why are they so resistant to this? So this presumes in your mind, if you ask the question this way, that the folded arms mean reservedness. A good quality, a high quality question could be, I notice this person is sitting cross-armed. What can I make that mean? Remember, presume positive intent. So if you ask yourself, I noticed something, what could that mean? That allows for different interpretations of the behavior. So whether you ask your counterpart or your vis-a-vis directly, or whether you ask yourself how to decode the nonverbal message, that will depend on the rapport you have with that other person. And it'll depend on your comfort level and on how effectively you're able to read the body language. But rest assured, the arms crossed does not always mean the same thing. In my case, I am one of these people who sit like this a lot, especially during presentations or business meetings when somebody else is talking. To me, it means, or for me, that behavior reflects that I'm very attentive, that I'm focused, and that I'm resting my arms in front of my body, that I want to listen, and I want to lock my arms so they don't distract the speaker. So it could be a completely different meaning than I am reserved or not interested. The same could be physical distance. Now, in times of COVID, this doesn't happen as much, right? You may not be meeting in person as much as you've done before. However, I think it's relevant to point this out, and you may come across this again when you have physical meetings or meetings in the same space. Physical distance from one another is one of these aspects, right? How close do you stand away from the other person? In most North American or most Western European contexts, it's typically an arm's length distance. In other cultures, it's different. I'll never forget my first business interactions with people from Argentina and many other Latin American cultures for that matter. They tend to stand fairly close to one another, and proximity, physical proximity, signals rapport, signals mutual trust. So be aware of that as well. Now, in our world of virtual communication, we don't have the full body language. We have the video frame oftentimes only, right? Which is to say, I don't care how bad your hair is today, and I don't care what your background looks like, if it's cleaned up or not, or whether there's a cat crawling in the background. It doesn't really matter because or most of us are working from home. My plea is turn the camera on. Remember, words and tonality are only 2 of the 3 parts. People need to see you. When they see you communicate, you transfer so much meaning through your nonverbal cues, through your body language, even if it's only this video frame, even if you're only giving them a quarter or a third of your body to see, you're still communicating through what's visible. Turn the camera on. You look awesome. You got this. And number 12, almost the final tip here would be accept that you have superpowers. Now, they may be buried. That's why I invite you to bring them out. I want you to accept that you're not perfect and that you will make mistakes when communicating across cultures. And one of the best attitudes to cultivate for global business success is being vulnerable. Your personal normal will sometimes support you, and at other times you'll need to adjust it. Owning up to your gaffes, owning up to your missteps isn't always pleasant. You will learn and grow from it. Trust yourself. Trust your mentor, trust your coach to guide you with that. And those gaffes, those missteps, they're inevitable. And those of you who are not ashamed of your faux pas when interacting with other cultures, those of you will go much further in international business. Your communication will be much more efficient than those of you who would prefer to be know-it-alls and perfectionists and dogmatists and wall builders. If you want to build bridges, you got to be vulnerable. So get comfortable with revealing that. It's easier said than done. I'm proof of that. I've struggled with this for years. And I learned that it's not a weakness, it's a strength, it's a superpower. And know that learning anything new comes with discomfort. You are trying on new behaviors, you're trying on new knowledge. That's not always easy. It didn't say it was going to be comfortable all the time. you'll feel a bit self-conscious or awkward. It's almost like learning to dance with a partner you've not met before. At some point you'll screw up and you'll step on each other's toes. You might not even know the music that they're playing. It may make you feel uneasy, it'll make you feel nervous or embarrassed, and particularly if you're not accustomed, or particularly if you're used to winning, or if you are accustomed to be the winner or the leader or the one who shows up successfully all the time. Especially for those of us who are used to being right or getting their way, this feeling of uneasiness and embarrassment may be a bit hard to handle. However, if you stay committed to learning and to your success, you'll get better. Now, these are just 12 of the tips that I have for you. Actually, I want to go back and show you, I'm going to show you where you can find those tips in a condensed form. I've prepared them for you and it's easy for you to get them. I wrote an ebook that can be easily downloaded, and it comes with no restrictions. It comes with no costs. It comes with no strings attached. So let's look at this real quick. So if you want to get it right globally, make sure you get culture before it gets you. Make sure you remember some of these tips, and here's where you can find them. A dozen tips for efficient communication across cultures, written by yours truly. And let me move myself out of the way. You see this link up here. That's where you can download it. As I said, it's free. Share it with your team members, share it within your organization, with friends, with clients even. So this is something that I put together not because I want to make a profit from this. This is the condensed knowledge of what I presented to you in these couple of minutes that we're spending here with each other. And I would really invite you to take advantage of this. It's part of who we are, part of what we do, and we extend this to the IDA community. I thank you for your attention. I thank you for allowing me to speak to you today. And I wish you a wonderful and successful conference. Interact with each other, communicate with each other, practice some of the dozen tips that I gave you today. Check it out. Be vulnerable. You might find it funny because you might interact with somebody who listened to the same presentation as you did. And you might crack each other up because you're trying and you're still figuring this thing out. And don't take yourself too serious when you do it. There is a way to do this right, and it comes with humility and vulnerability. So have a wonderful IDA conference. Thank you again. My name is Christian Höferle, as you see here, and I hope to hear from you soon. Much success to you. Have a wonderful week.